Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of today's webinar from Just Solutions. We'll go ahead and let a few more folks into the webinar as we get started. Cool. And just so everyone knows, this is being recorded. So thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Dawson. I use he, they pronouns. I am the Director of State Initiatives with Just Solutions. We are a national climate justice organization that seeks to provide equitable and resourceful information to climate justice advocates across the country. I'm really excited about today's topic on transmission build-out and the equity and justice implications of that. We have a wonderful panelist that I'll talk about in a second, but for that, I want to first just give a bit of a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we occupy the stolen land of Turtle Island, indigenous to countless native tribes and their people of the past, present, and future. So as we enter today's conversation, just want to make sure that everyone is grounded in solidarity and that wherever you are joining us from, you are feeling appreciative and grateful of the past, present, and future history of that land. So thank you so much. As I mentioned, we're a national organization. We're looking mainly to drive innovative and equitable solutions from the ground up for the climate crisis. And so we work really closely with communities across the country to make sure that their voice is heard in the tables that they sit at. When it comes to providing those solutions, we do research and policy analysis. We're also a communications and education shop, and we do some campaigning work as well. So if you have any questions about just the full suite of work that Just Solutions does, I'm more than happy to have a longer conversation, and you can find our contact information at the end of the webinar. So today's topic on transmission, we'll talk a little bit about what transmission is, have a little 101, how does it relate to environmental justice, and then talk a little bit more specifically about state level impacts from California to the Midwest. And then lastly, we'll close with some options related to what states and communities can do in transmission engagement, planning, siting, things of that nature. Lastly, we'll have a quick Q&A. And so if you have any questions that pop up during the webinar, please feel free to add those to the chat, and the host and panelists will be able to see those, as well as, if necessary, we can come off of mute, and I will allow folks to ask some questions. As you likely see, there are some folks already putting their introductions in the chat, and so please feel free to do that. We'd love to see just kind of the full suite of engagement that we have today, and so we'd love for folks just put their name, organization, where they're coming in from, and whatnot. Before we jump into our lovely panelists today, including some staff from Just Solutions, Elena Krieger, our Senior Director of Research and Policy Analysis, and then Arjun Makajani, who's a Senior Fellow with our organization, as well as Alexis Sutterman, who's a Senior Policy Manager with Brightline Defense, and Tanya Pezlowski, Founder and Principal of Elevated Engagement. Really excited for you all to hear from them today. They're wonderful on this topic. But before we do that, I do want to do a quick poll. If everyone's cool, just wanting to launch, wanting to know really where you're calling in from, what region is this mostly hitting with? We're seeing that there's a lot of folks from the West, so I'm not surprised by that. As a former Californian, I forgot to say, I'm calling in today from Dallas, Texas, but as a former Californian, really understand why this is such a niche topic. So that's awesome. That's really awesome. Give folks a few more seconds to answer. National, perfect. Oh, we have a good number of folks from the Midwest as well. Perfect. Cool. And then we have one more other question that I would love to ask folks, which is, so you can see firstly which region folks work in, so that's great. One more other question that we would love to ask folks, which is related to what is your knowledge level on this topic so far? And so we will launch that. How informed on the topic? And we ask that because we'd love to get a sense of kind of where folks are at in their edification and know that we can have future conversations about this topic if necessary. So just want to give folks a few more seconds to answer that question. Perfect. So not a lot, and some know a lot, but others not so much. And then we have a good amount of people who do have professional knowledge on it. We're perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for the experts on this. We should engage with you next time. I'll go ahead and end the poll really quickly and share those results so folks can see that. Thank you for participating. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to our Senior Director of Research or Policy Analysis, or is actually Arjun, sorry, of Arjun Makujani, our Senior Fellow at Just Solutions, who will be able to get us started today. Arjun, take it away. You are muted if just.
Okay, unmute. Why can't I bring up the presentation mode? I just did it. There. All right. So there's fine print on some of these slides. Please don't try to read it. I'm not going to. It's there for you when you get the slides just to provide you with detail. So I have 10 minutes to go through a bunch of slides. This is Transmission 101. There are a lot of experts, so feel free to add during the discussion time. So basically, I think of electricity flow through wires as the water system flows through pipes. The voltage is the electrical pressure that pushes the electrons through. And in the end, when you turn on your tap, you get a certain number of gallons per second. You put on the switch and you get watts. Current times voltage. That's the amount of energy that's flowing per second. It can be watts, kilowatts, 1,000 watts, megawatts, million watts. When you turn on your toaster, it's about a kilowatt, depending on the toaster. You toast your bread for 1 minute. If you do that 60 times, it's a kilowatt hour. So that's what you pay for, how long a particular load is on. And just like, when you pay for water, how long the tap is running and how much water is running through that tap. So basically, the system works physically very much like water flowing through pipes, except the energy is electrical, and we measure it in watts and kilowatt hours. The biggest difference is that electrons must go around exactly every second. Electrons can't be stored. When we say store electricity, like in a battery, we're really storing chemical energy and then recovering it as electrical energy later on. We're not storing the electrons moving anywhere. In addition to that, we need a constant voltage. That is, the pressure must be, when you got 120 volts, it must be pretty close to that. And frequency. The motors won't work properly in your refrigerator, and your computer's clocks will not work, and everything that works on a clock, which is a lot, will not work unless the frequency is constant. So we have alternating current electricity, 60 cycles per second in the United States. In Europe, it's 50. So this is a schematic of the transmission system as it existed maybe 20 years ago without a lot of distributed resources. So at the left, you have a generating station. These are very large. They can be 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts. 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plant has as much energy in the reactor as the heat from 30 million people. So that's a lot of energy. In other ways, it's a million houses. So the energy is not generated at very high voltage, 13, 15, I don't remember the exact number, but you convert it to high voltage, 765 kV is kilovolts, because you want to reduce the higher the pressure, the lower the current, and the losses go as the square of the current. So you have an interest when you have long distance transmission to increase the voltage. That's what that step up transformer is. It steps up the voltage from whatever the generating voltage is to the numbers on top of those blue lines. 138 to 765 kV. So that's sort of the high voltage transmission system we're talking about today. And then there's step down power. Some customers get high voltage power. Those are heavy industries. Some customers get medium voltage power. Those are industries like in-state industries, maybe cement plants. And then at our homes, we get 120 and 240 volts. So that's a lot different from 765,000 volts. Transformers are basically electromagnets, very, very efficient. Obviously, they have to be, otherwise, you'd lose a lot of electricity. So since electricity has to be balanced, there are balancing areas. Sorry for the fuzzy map. It's the best that I could find that was not copyrighted. Um, there are three major grids: the Eastern Interconnect, green; the Western Interconnect, bluish; and then there's the Lone Star Grid, ERCOT. Electric Reliability Council of Texas is the only grid that is not under the jurisdiction of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission because it's entirely within a single state, no interstate. Essentially, no interstate electricity is involved. And they do a lot of very interesting, innovative things in Texas as a result, actually. I think they have far more renewable energy than anybody else, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, since electricity must be balanced, there are these balancing authorities, and they have to coordinate with their neighboring balancing authorities, of course. Um, so here are the elements of the present grid. It's mainly large-scale generation, so often very far from, not always, but often very far from the consumers. Uh, and so that's why you need these transmission lines and you need high voltage to reduce losses. Fossil fuel, nuclear, hydro, that was essentially all of it maybe 20, 25 years ago. Today, we have more solar and wind, of course. Uh, it is dispatchable. That means it can be switched on and off. Just like the switch at the consumer end, the generator can be switched on and off. And one of the ways the loads are balanced is some, like gas turbines, are spinning reserves. They're spinning all the time. So when the load comes on, it dispatches more load. When it's switched off, it dispatches less. The system must accommodate peak load. So the average capacity factor of the electric industry is something like 55, 60%. Unlike, say, heavy industry, which wants to make maximum use of its capital, that's because it must accommodate peak load. Peak load is expensive. So transmission losses are roughly 2%. You'll find different numbers, these 5 to 7%. So I use 6%. 4% distribution losses. So distribution goes through miles, transmission goes through hundreds of miles, but because of the high voltage, the losses are much lower. And when the losses go up, when the load goes up, so in the peak of the summer on the worst day, you could have transmission distribution losses as much as 15%. So this is how the money is spent in the electricity system. I won't dwell on this, but you can see a lot of it is operating expenses. There's also a lot of investment in the distribution and transmission side. Uh, so just to give you an idea, it's about a $500 billion business. So 2% transmission losses is a lot, 10 billion there's a year. So there's an interest in reducing that. Distribution losses, of course, also. But that's limited because you're limited to transmitting the last bit at low voltages. So I looked at a Maryland bill. I live in Maryland, so I looked at a bill to see how these costs are distributed. So the rate nowadays is about 20 cents a kilowatt hour, middling for the country, maybe on the high end. Transmission is about 10% of that, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Distribution was 4.3 cents, generation 10.5, and the rest was. So 85% of it is transmission, generation, distribution, and the rest is connection charges, fees, and taxes. Gives you an idea of how the money is distributed in the system. Rates may vary from 12, 14 cents to 40 cents in the residential side. That was a residential bill. So you must have reliability of supply. As we know, electricity is maybe the most essential commodity. No food, no gas, no lights, no industry without electricity. So the load is growing, so we're going to need a lot more electricity, electrification of transport, heating, data centers, maybe 50 to 100% more over the next 30-ish years, depending on how much efficiency we do. Climate extremes require resilience. In addition to traditional reliability is loss of load due to technical reasons. Your generators are out at peak time. You have a sudden outage for 1,000 megawatt generator, and it brings nearby loads down and causes sudden disturbances in the system. So that's what traditional reliability refers to. 1 day every 10 years. 2 hours and 24 minutes a year on average. Um, but it doesn't include like these long outages due to extreme weather events or like the shutoffs of power in California from risk of fire and so on. It does not include that. So we need to include that. That's getting worse, and we need to take that into account. So we need resilience and local power sources. Fortunately, it's not possible with solar to have that with zero emissions. So uh, the future grid will be different because if we have wind and solar, they're dispatched by Mother Nature. They are forecastable approximately, but not minute to minute. And they are not dispatchable. So the importance of storage in batteries, demand response, hydro storage, seasonal thermal, various kinds of storage becomes much, much more important. Cars will store electricity. They can be very important. So here's the map of the wind resource. So one reason we're talking about high voltage transmission is renewable resources are not equally distributed. So you can see the center of the country has by far the best wind resources. Now, the output of wind grows disproportionately fast relative to wind speed. So wind speed, this is showing map of wind speed. So the output and the quantity of power available. So Wyoming alone has as much wind energy potential, I think, as the entire nuclear power output of the country, if I'm remembering my numbers right. This is a solar energy map also, but solar energy is actually better distributed. Of course, it's everywhere, but the quality of solar energy is better distributed than indicated by this map. So Seattle doesn't look very good, but if we remember that Germany was in many ways, a leader and remains a leader in solar energy. They have worse solar energy than Seattle, which is not very good in this map. And it isn't very good because Seattle's pretty rainy. There's offshore wind, and this shows two kinds of offshore wind, fixed bottom that is anchored to the seafloor, and floating turbines. Both are now commercialized. So I've already mentioned reliability issues, and I'll skip this. The one thing I'd like to say here is currently we have one-way traffic. So the communication between consumer and producer is the consumer switch. You switch it on, the water pressure should be there. The electricity should come to your toaster, uh, and you switch it off, it should go away. And in the future, when you have rooftop solar, when you have distributed batteries, when you have demand response, you need a two-way communication between producers and consumers, because consumers are now also producers. There's that new word you all probably know, prosumers, producer consumers. Okay, that brings me to the end. Oh, where was my example? Oh, I skipped this slide. I wanted to give an example of a major transmission project that has been in the works since 2009. It was first proposed, and the first paperwork started the year after that. It's across 4 states, Midwestern states. It's called the Grain Belt Express. 800 miles, $7 billion, 5,000 megawatts, and it's to carry renewable energy from southwestern Kansas to these 4 states. There are 4 balancing authorities involved. Uh, there are lots of easements, lots of landowners, thousands and thousands of landowners involved. They want a loan from the federal government, so the federal government is involved. When the federal government makes a major decision, they have to do an environmental impact statement. So there is an draft environmental statement that has been prepared in the notes that you don't see in this view. I've given you the URL so you can look at it. And in terms of land use, here's what the draft environmental impact statement says. It crosses 26 hydrologic subbasins and includes approximately 7,554. That's about 12 square miles of estimated permanent and temporary surface disturbance. I don't know if that's all the land use. I'm not sure. I confess I did not read the whole EIS, so I'm not sure that's all the land use, but that's the best I could find in the summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. Really appreciate that background information. And now we'll pass it over to Elena Krieger, who will kind of talk a little bit about kind of the justice implications of the information Arjun just talked about. So Elena?
Great. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Perfect.
Great. So hi, everyone. I'm Elena. I lead our research team here at Just Solutions. And I am going to build a little bit on some of what Arjun spoke about and give a quick overview on some of the places that are in charge of transmission decision making, and then spend most of my time talking through a few different transmission-related issue areas and what these actually mean for communities. In some cases, impacts of transmission are direct and transparent, but in a lot of cases, transmission decisions can affect pollution, they can affect affordability, they can affect resilience, all of these things that we care about, but in ways that aren't always transparent. So I'm going to walk through siting and land use, interconnection delays, opportunities to displace local pollution, energy reliability and security, and non-transmission alternatives. So we could probably spend hours on this slide, and I'm not going to, but I wanted to give a quick snapshot of where transmission decisions are made, and this is not comprehensive either. We're talking about questions like, how much transmission do we even need? Where do we need it? Where exactly does it go? And who pays for it? One of the challenges for community engagement, and frankly, for transmission planning itself, which, as Arjun pointed out, can take a really, really long time and be really slow, is that decisions have to be coordinated across agencies, across jurisdictions, from local permitting to federal cost allocation rules. So a couple of these examples include at the federal level, we have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which regulates interstate transmission, and it oversees the regional grid operators, which Arjun showed you a snapshot of, determines cost allocation rules, oversees some long-term planning. Congress can weigh in on funding levels and directives to agencies. We have federal level reliability standards, transmission modeling, and there are even federal authorities that own transmission in some locations, like the Bonneville Power Administration and the Tennessee Valley Authority. And permitting across different agencies depending on the kind of project and location. At the regional level, again, back to that map we saw from Arjun, we have regional grid operators and independent system operators that are balancing power across often multiple states in different places, sometimes an individual state. They're the ones who are typically modeling reliability and transmission needs, identifying new requirements, and overseeing planning and local markets, but they don't exist everywhere. In those cases, we have a lot of similar planning taking place at utility commissions and with the utilities. And the utilities are typically the ones who own the transmission and are making local upgrades and identifying local needs. And then we also have a whole bunch of state level permitting and planning processes. So engaging this is complex, and particularly for some of the agencies like the ISOs and the RTOs, these regional operators, the barrier to participation can be really high. I pulled this from the FERC webpage about opportunities to participate in the California Independent System Operator process. And the short version of this is basically It's really hard. It's really complex. You should probably just find a friend who knows more than you do and have them help you out. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, throughout this process to try to improve, smooth, and lower barriers to engagement for communities throughout. Why does this even matter? I think the most straightforward and most direct set of impacts related to transmission are citing land use and community benefit agreements and community agreements for the actual building of the projects. So opportunities include community benefit agreements that can, encourage local investments, include workforce and job standards. There's opportunities for co-ownership of transmission. We've seen some tribal agreements lately that enable that co-ownership. This can only be enabled if you have true community engagement and participation, including, let's say, funding to enable this participation. And there's a lot of risks associated with transmission siting too. So we have biodiversity risks, habitat risks, eminent domain can take people's houses, we have property value impacts, visual and noise impacts, and risks to ancestral and culturally important tribal lands. But there are also indirect impacts associated with transmission that can be pretty important. One of the huge challenges facing transmission right now are interconnection delays. On the right side of this, we have a figure of the amount of energy proposed these are solar systems, batteries that are proposed to connect to the transmission grid by year. Pink and purple are batteries, yellow is solar, green is wind. And what you can see here is that transmission queue is getting backed up and backed up. It's getting longer and longer and harder to interconnect new energy systems. And this really is affecting renewable energy and energy storage. What does this mean for people? Well, it slows renewable energy growth. And what that means is that all of the old legacy fossil systems that are polluting communities, that are emitting greenhouse gases and criteria air pollutants are going to stick around for longer. And it's also expensive. So this is causing transmission costs to rise and exacerbating all of the affordability impacts and utility bill impacts that we've been seeing over recent years. Not all of the interconnection delays are related to transmission, but a lot of them are. One of those has to do with lack of capacity. There just simply aren't enough lines to connect renewable energy resources to the grid, lack of long-term planning, prohibitive rules for things like energy storage, and slow permitting. A study that I think came out maybe last week found that reforms, including transmission reforms, could save Mid-Atlantic customers and PJM $505 per household over 15 years. The pollution potential of benefits from transmission can also be a little more direct than just adding more renewables. One of the challenges that we see in certain areas, I'm thinking about New York and Los Angeles, these dense urban areas, so you have a huge amount of electricity demand, and sometimes what are called transmission constraints. There's a lack of transmission coming into that area. And this is often used as an excuse to keep power plants running in those cities. So we get peaker power plants. They're often expensive in disadvantaged communities, polluting those local communities. And lack of transmission is given as an excuse to keep them running. Even in places like Los Angeles, where these are supposed to be phased out, and they're supposed to be getting rid of gas, they're now considering repowering these with things like hydrogen, which will continue to emit co-pollutants like nitrogen oxides and impact air quality in the local area. There's issues related to energy reliability and security. Integrating renewable energy over a large area helps balance out all the intermittency and variability that we get from things like solar and wind power. So if the sun isn't shining in one place, it might be shining somewhere else. And it reduces, if you can balance that out with transmission, it can reduce the need for additional energy storage and for things like gas plants. It can also provide energy security during extreme climate events. And the example that I'm going to give actually is from the polar vortex in the Northeast back in 2014, when some of the locational prices spiked as high as $2,000 a megawatt hour for electricity because everyone needed gas, both for the gas power plants and for heating. And some of the gas plants started burning oil, which had even higher pollution rates in particularly low-income communities of color, where many of these plants are sited. I actually went to the New York ISO, the grid operator, the next year and asked them about this and said, what are you going to do? And unfortunately, their default was to just say, oh, we just need more gas plants and we need more gas storage. And that's how we'll solve this energy security issue. And I pushed back because one of the real opportunities here is actually to build out more transmission, interconnect more renewables, and use that to increase reliability against extreme climate events over other areas. Transmission isn't always great. It can, for example, in LA, enable the ongoing use of dirtier resources like imports of coal power, even when it's been phased out over most of California. And a last comment, transmission isn't always the answer. When determining whether transmission is actually needed in a given place, there's other alternatives. Sometimes we can upgrade transmission. There are different kinds of technologies that enable us to put more power onto existing lines. And as Arjun said, we can also think about distributed energy resources, which may be able to provide additional co-benefits to communities, simultaneously reducing the need for transmission and providing local benefits like resilience. So I'm going to wrap it up there and I believe pass it over to Alexis to talk a little more specifically about what we're seeing on the ground in California. Thanks.
Thanks, Elena. Alexis, just want to take it away?
I'm so sorry. It took me so long to find the unmute because of um, having my screen share on one screen and then it changed my entire other screen. So apologies for the delay, y'all. Okay, can folks see my slides?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. So let me just situate myself with the new screen situation. Perfect. All right. Thanks all for your patience. I'm excited to talk to you today a bit about the transmission landscape and some solutions we're looking at in California. Definitely not comprehensive, but just a snapshot of some of the issues that have been coming up, and definitely a lot of alignment with the prior speakers, kind of just sharing that community lens. So I also wanted to highlight, a lot of this has been drawn upon a report that Brightline recently launched on transmission. And so, yeah, excited to kind of go through some of those key takeaways as we're thinking about transmission in California. Let me do the next slide. So yeah, today I'm going to basically walk us through these solutions from justice-oriented lenses. So first, just kind of go over the lenses and then talk about, go through each one, basically recognition justice, then moving into procedural justice, and then finally thinking about just distributive justice as it relates to transmission. There are some acronyms I'll use throughout. I'll try to be careful to explain them, but these are a snapshot of a couple of the ones I use in the presentation, just for folks' knowledge. And I kind of wanted to start with just really thinking about the energy transition itself as this opportunity to advance racial, social, economic, and environmental justice. This quote here is something that I feel really grounds me in thinking about the need and the opportunity for transmission and clean energy. So in our report and in the takeaways I'll discuss, I think we find it really important to ensure that we are centering various lenses as related to justice. So thinking about recognition justice, really recognizing that EJ communities face much greater environmental harms due to a long history of redlining, discrimination, and neglect. Also looking at procedural justice, how do we have an inclusive and transparent process that includes early and active engagement with EJ communities? And then finally, distributive justice, ensuring our communities can finally reap the long overdue benefits of the clean energy system we're building. So as related to transmission, then the first section here, we really wanted to ensure folks understood that transmission, or to reground in the fact that transmission originally served as the backbone of an inequitable fossil fuel energy system. So as we look at the history of energy infrastructure development in the United States, we know that in the 19th and 20th centuries, this is when the first wave of transmission development occurred, and it was really spurred by industry actors to build these larger fossil fuel power plants that could connect power to population centers. And growth continued in this era to really capture economies of scale. And this led to a rapid growth of primarily petroleum, natural gas, and coal, which have dominated the nation's power mix. So just understanding the history of how transmission first developed to kind of power this fossil fuel energy system, I think is important. And recognizing that while this new system allowed much larger segments of society to connect to power, it also came at a high cost, especially to the planet and to environmental justice communities. We know that fossil fuels are the leading driver of the climate, biodiversity, and public health crises we face today. And we know that environmental justice communities have borne the brunt of these crises in terms of the health and economic burdens they've borne through the fossil fuel energy system. As we recognize this and we see the need for new transmission in California and beyond, we can now use that history to think of a new way of building out transmission to support a clean and equitable energy future. And there are some case studies that we include in our report. I think for sake of time, I'll just have them here as a slide for folks to look at once the report gets sent out. But we did want to highlight some key moments in advocacy in which these lenses were applied, such as the retirement of the Potrero Hill power plant and thinking about community-led gas plant retirement campaigns that are really grounded in this recognition of environmental injustice. The second piece here is really thinking about how we can engage EJ communities in transmission planning and how this can actually lead to smarter and better development for California. So recognizing that EJ communities are experts on their neighborhoods, and there are EJ communities and tribal nations that really have that expertise of different sacred lands, cemeteries, and culturally relevant ecosystems and landmarks that may be impacted by transmission. So meaningful engagement with these communities and tribal nations can really help California developers and communities work through and resolve any potential issues in transmission siting and planning sooner, and increase community support and trust in the projects overall. This ultimately can help reduce costs and conflicts down the road, and just ensure we're developing transmission in a smarter and community-led way. Let me do the next slide here. So transmission planning, I didn't get into too much of the finer details of it, but I did want to showcase that transmission planning does take around a decade. I think recent projects in California have taken longer than a decade to build out, and there are various stages in this planning and development process. I think it's really important for us to, in California, and I'm assuming beyond as well, but focusing on my state, really ensure that local communities and tribal nations are engaged early and actively through each stage. And specifically wanting to call out that if there's community engagement that's happening, all the way here in phase 3, for instance, whereas sometimes that's the California Environmental Quality Act or CEQA review, this is way too late in the process, and really want to see, community engagement start from the onset, which is even beginning at phase 1, the planning process at the California Independent System Operator, or the CAISO. So in our report, we actually do focus more so on this phase 1, although we know and recognize community engagement should be, carried throughout each phase. But in terms of this phase in particular, we had drawing upon, recommendations from other great experts in the space, and just from our own dialogues and interactions with community-based organizations, we really thought a couple of these core recommendations could help improve the process of the CAISO. First being, having environmental justice liaisons for community engagement that could go between the community and the CAISO process and ensure that communities are plugged in at every stage. Also ensuring there is capacity building and financial assistance to support communities in even accessing the materials, the technical support and legal expertise, or even just having funding to attend different workshops and build up their knowledge on the transmission planning process, I think is something that's core to this work that we really want to see California be a leader on. In addition to that, really wanting to push the CAISO to honor tribal sovereignty and really ensure they're meeting with tribal nations and forming tribal agreements and identifying ways for co-management of transmission infrastructure. I think this is a key aspect of the work going forward. Knowing tribal nations are experts on a lot of these areas we've mentioned before and can really help the state in building transmission more responsibly. And then finally, thinking about justice-oriented criteria in contract solicitation. So ensuring that as CAISO is scoring transmission developers, they are taking into account the developers' intentions and commitments to engage communities and provide meaningful benefits. Again, I'll skip some of the case studies for time, but encourage folks to review them in the report. And then finally here on the last lens, the last justice lens is equitable transmission planning really can and should, I should put should there, reduce costs and maximize benefits to environmental justice communities. So we know that environmental justice communities are the most energy burdened at this time, as folks I think have called out in the chat when I had access to look at it earlier. Affordability is a big concern. And how do we in this new era, we know we need to get transmission and clean energy built to even retire our fossil fuel plants and get clean air for our communities. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't overburden communities who are already struggling on their energy bills and other household essentials? So in our report, and as folks are talking about in the California landscape, there's definitely a suite of solutions when it comes to reducing costs of transmission build out. A couple of the ones that folks have been talking about that, and there's even been lots of advocacy around, is ensuring there's progressive rate structure and bill protections at the onset for EJ communities. So this means entertaining the idea of an income graduated fixed charge, which California has done, but making sure that that fixed charge is actually progressive and equitable. I think folks many environmental justice advocates have been disappointed by the recent decision in California that the CPUC made on the way they structured the recent charge. So just thinking about how we can make that more progressive. There's also a need to really ensure the CPUC is regulating investor-owned utilities and having them pursue cost-effective options. So as Elena talked about, distributed energy resources, modern grid technologies like grid enhancing technologies, and other options that can complement transmission and ensure we're moving forward in a way that's most beneficial for communities. Then there's also thinking about public financing of transmission. Like, is there a way the state can play a role in funding new transmission build out in a way that's less burdensome for ratepayers? And then finally here, thinking about opportunities for interregional grid planning that can really ensure we're utilizing our resources most effectively. And I think the asterisk here is as we're reviewing plans to think about moving towards a more Western grid in California, just ensuring that this is still very much tied to fossil fuel retirements. And I'm almost done. So lastly, I think in addition to just, protecting communities from high cost, we really wanted to explore how this new transmission build out can bring important benefits for environmental justice communities. For sake of time, I'll just mention that two key things related to this. One, I think benefits have to be, there's kind of a couple layers of benefits, but essentially when we think about benefits, we want to emphasize that baseline environmental requirements, such as or meeting baseline environmental and air quality requirements, should be a standard, and then benefits should be, additional and on top of those requirements, to really be bringing more opportunities for frontline communities. And some interesting and innovative ways to do that are thinking about how we can set up communities for success in project agreements, in order to and project agreements are essentially contracts that communities can negotiate with developers to retain higher benefits and compensation for the impact of transmission development in their regions. I think I'm out of time, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexis. And as mentioned in the chat, all the slides and information that was shared, including the reports, will be sent out in a follow-up email as well. But lastly, we want to go over to Tanya Pezlowski, who can talk a little bit about what's happening in the Midwest around this topic. So Tanya?
Hello, everyone. I am excited to be part of this discussion with all of you. We will try to move through this pretty quickly because I know we are coming close to the end of our time. A lot of, I think, the basics of the concept of justice in the transmission space have been well covered by the other presenters today, but just want to highlight a couple of things more generally, and then we'll dig into some of the specific things that are happening in the Midwest. One thing that I think is important, Alexis just covered some of the basic justice tenets that you see there. And what you see on the right side is coming from a Pacific Northwest National Laboratory resource on principles for transmission equity that I actually have both linked at the bottom and as part of a resource pack at the back. But I think it's really important that we are being conscious about where people live and how they're impacted as we are beginning the process of the transmission planning process. That's a piece that's really missing, of having some way to consider as an overlay of where transmission is being discussed or where transmission is needed, and then who lives there and the potential for how they'll be impacted. I think there was a good discussion about the opportunity for participation and what is being required there, that there are resources needed in order to make that even a possibility for folks to be involved in the decision making. And that is funding resources to allow people to actually be in the room as these discussions are taking place, but also providing the background resources that are needed to do that effectively. And appreciate the focus on the necessity of recognizing that benefits need to accrue to the communities where these projects reside. This is among the long list of challenges that I think are important to just be aware of as we're talking about transmission development, because there are many. Transmission is so much more remote than, say, the distribution system that people can see in their backyard and that their homes are attached to. Transmission can often be long distances away. That makes even the concept of how it will potentially benefit them, if it isn't directly in their neighborhood, makes it very difficult often to understand what those potential impacts will be. So you'll have this to look later on, but just noting that there are a number of challenges for communities to be able to meaningfully participate in the transmission development space. So in the Midwest, one of the, I think, really wonderful things that has been led in the Midwest, and I see Sam Gomber is on from the Union of Concerned Scientists, that participated in the development of a set of equitable grid principles. In the MISO is the Mid-American Independent System Operator. It is, if you remember Arjun's chart at the beginning, covers a lot of the Midwest and also part of the South. And what you see here is the group of organizations that came together to work on what the fundamental things are in grid development that that are important to serve the communities where these resources may be built. And I want to just highlight the great array of organizations across that geographic footprint that participated in this work, because I think it is a model for others to consider, even if there isn't a specific transmission project or planning cycle that someone is involved in, that we can work together to build networks that include folks who are familiar with transmission development and have the technical and potentially legal expertise to participate, and community organizations who are affected by transmission but have not been engaged before. And to be able to build that community together so that the support that is already there can be connected with the communities and to help make decisions that serve those who are most impacted. Again, there is a link here and also in the back of the presentation, so you can see more about the specifics of this, these grid principles. Here is the principles themselves that are listed in the resource. There's a great description of each of them and why they matter. Due to time, I won't dig into all of these, but you get a sense of the scope of the type of things that we need to take into consideration as we are looking at how we should modify our thinking and our approach to transmission development. I should add here too, one, I know we got a question about the region where some of the maybe anti-equity types of policies may be most impactful. And I mentioned that though MISO is a lot in the Midwest, and I mentioned the Midwest, it also covers the South. There are parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, and I'm missing a state. But the South is a place where it has been really challenging to develop some of the broader type of transmission development that can help bring more efficient power to communities, that is critical to helping with that the potential to lower costs and therefore lower bills. And there's some great work going on that the Union of Concerned Scientists and a number of other groups, community organizations in the South are pursuing right now to try to actively push for more transmission development in the southern region. You can look at this. I'm going to pass this up. This is again in that Pacific Northwest National Laboratory report of things that can be done within these tenets of energy justice. So please take a look at that when you receive the resources. But want to highlight here what I think are some really critical actions to have top of mind. One, that's part of the top of our goal as we think about bringing more equity to transmission development is to shift the balance of power from the few to the many and bringing more folks into the conversations about how things should be done, where they should be done, what should be considered in approving, for instance, some of these projects. One of the most critical things that we can do for folks who are in the industry already is being able to challenge accepted norms. There are so many things like least cost transmission is always the best transmission. Therefore, building in communities who already are plagued with a lot of pollution or a lot of industry gives us the least cost. So though that is a decision that we can make, and it makes it very cut and dry. And so we need to challenge those norms to bring some of the ideas that we have discussed today into the conversations about development. I want to highlight also for those of you who are in the industry and already work in the industry, using your knowledge and resources to be intentional about building up community organizations' capacity to participate, to build networks of folks who can come together to help tackle some of these issues, help monitor some of the activities and report out to each other, are ways that we can help bridge these gaps between folks who have not participated but are impacted, and those who are already part of the discussions. So urge all of you with those resources, like folks like the Union of Concerned Scientists that were critical in building out those equitable grid principles. Those types of activities can have such an incredible impact. So urge you all to consider where there might be opportunities for you to do that in your own work. Things like advisory groups or having a role within the regulatory body, the New England Independent System Operator, or the RTO that covers the New England region, they have an equity officer that they have hired in order to help figure out how to do some of these things differently. There was a lot of discussion about local benefits and assets, the opportunity for communities to own, and this has been done, I know, in some tribal examples, but would love to see this expanded of communities having an ownership in the asset. That way, if there's money being made in delivering energy, that community is seeing some of that economic benefit. We talked about accessibility to decision-making already, so I won't cover that more, but just making sure that we as participants in the industry are aware of the harms that can befall the communities where these where transmission is being proposed or being built, and being able to share that so our own awareness is critical. And then to just highlight, there are a couple of resources here that talk about how to meaningfully engage in community, how to respect the input of community needs and priorities and cultural values into how we create our building together, and being able to interact in an effective and respectful way with folks who, again, are not already engaged in this work of transmission development. So those are just a couple of resources that may be beneficial. And then finally, you will receive these. All of these are links to just some of the different work that has been done already in exploring different approaches to equity in transmission development. So with that, I thank you for your time and look forward to questions.
Thanks so much. Just share my screen real quick. Thanks so much, Tony. That was really great. I just want to share something with folks. A lot of state opportunities and actions have been discussed today. And so this slide really quickly just highlights four of them. Four buckets of kind of those opportunities or action: advancing proactive state policies, so integrating transmission planning into your energy planning strategies within the state, building state and regional coalitions. Obviously, these are huge swaths of land that the balancing systems and operators cover. And so coordinating across states is something that we at Just Solutions is really embedded in and wanting to help folks do. And so please reach out if you have any questions about that. Demanding community-centered engagement. We've talked a lot about that today. And so insisting on early and inclusive consultation, but also making sure that your state has the resources to do the engagement up front. And so making sure that there's money in the state budget for community engagement coordinators and things of that nature. And then lastly, pushing for modernization, whether that's grid enhancing technology, policies, or financing. We've talked a lot today about public financing mechanisms, and there are some opportunities that will be more highlighted in some of the resources that we plan to send out after this. But really quickly, just want to really thanks so much our panelists today. I do think we have time for like one or two questions. And so if you can stay on, that'd be great. I fully understand if you are not able to. Given that, I want to go ahead and ask two questions. One is, are there any speakers who are able to speak to the recent CAISO TPP, so transmission planning? I forgot what the other P is. Any comments are you planning to uplift by 429 deadline? Anyone want to take that one?
I can just say that we aren't planning to submit comments, Brightline, but generally speaking, I think some things that we are, are thinking about it for future even submissions or thinking about the transmission build out is some of the topics I touched upon on a high level, ensuring that the resources identified do lead to the, gas plant retirements in the state. And I think because such a big portion of those investments are going to transmission that's supporting offshore wind energy in California. I think, many groups, and I know, Hina, I think you're involved in this as well, which is great. Just really coming together to ensure those offshore wind and transmission investments do lead to the gas retirements we need and bring local reliability benefits even to Humboldt, a region that's had a lot of blackouts and energy shortages, and brings community benefits to the different areas in which the offshore wind and transmission will touch upon. So that was a bit high level, but just again wanted to call out that big offshore wind investment the state is moving towards in California at least, and how we can shape that towards a more just outcome.
Thanks, Alexis. Really appreciate you answering that question. And I will do the last question, which I think will be open for anyone, but can any of the panelists speak to some of those alternative financing mechanisms that will lower costs for ratepayers, but at the same time still provide for reliability, accessibility, and things of that nature? That's been a hot topic in the chat today, I noticed. Anyone?
Say that one more time. I was trying to answer a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that someone speak to like the alternative financing mechanisms that could potentially cost for ratepayers, but also provide accessibility. Anyone? Let me take a step at that. Tanya or Elena?
The aside from again some type of ownership where there's a community maybe is earning on an asset, the contribution from government funds in some fashion, either state or federal, is the ones that I have seen most prominent to try to just offset some of the local costs.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, again, want to thank everyone on our panel today. Really, really great presentations. We will be sending out all the slides and information and resources that was presented. Just want to note that Just Solutions does webinars often, and so please get on our newsletters and our messaging list. And if you want to get more information related to justice and equity principles on every issue across the map as it relates to the environment. So really appreciate everyone being here today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Brandon.